International Institute of Anthropological Applications, a virtual institute of Anthropological Association for Humankind, invites you to attend a webinar on Ambedkar on Nation and Nationalism, a ninth session of a webinar series of a virtual course entitled Ambedkar and the Agenda for Nation Building. This course is designed and instructed by Professor P.D.Satyapal Kumar from the Department of Anthropology, Andhra University. Now I request him to deliver his lectures.
Yeah, good evening and thank you, Dr. P.D.Satyapal and friends. Without losing much time, I think so we will catch up on this quite grueling topic actually. Anything like in the sense to discuss and any discourse on nation and nationalism has always been a vexed topic actually. And that too, when we are trying to connect Dr. Ambedkar with this particular topic and all, this very couching of Dr. Ambedkar with such a topic raises a lot of anxiety. Why? Because Ambedkar was in fact was considered as a leader of the oppressed people of this country, and at the most he is considered as the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution. And recently, post 1991, there has been some recognition that he has something significant to say about issues relating to the welfare and harmony of the wider society. Beyond that, Ambedkar has not been known to have said or dealt with this side of a topic called as a nation or nationalism. So therefore, in the general parlance, Ambedkar is a person non grata in such a discourse, especially on nation nationalism. Why? Because, like in the sense, I would like to quote Aloysius here when he said, academic heavyweights in this country would not touch him even with a barge pole, because in so many ways, Ambedkar clearly stands counter to and challenges the very basic social political ambitions, values, and vision of those euphemistically termed yet diversified as the middle class. So this sort of a euphemistically, like in a sense, a termed middle class, slowly, in fact, in terms of Ambedkar, becomes in fact the Brahminical. We will lead to that particular thing because he was not liked by this particular very very influential section of this society, and he was always kept away basically. And even the discourse on this subject called as nationalism has been considered as secretive, rather sacred, and sort of like in a sense keeping Ambedkar away from this from this particular discussion is considered as an overall elite strategy to maintain the dominance of its ideology over knowledge production and knowledge circulation in this country. More so, when a personality like Dr. Ambedkar has been blamed, in fact, now as a stooge of British, this continuous taunt, in fact, now has been there. He was taunted as pro-British, and sometimes, in fact, now also being labeled as the stooge of imperialism. So the incredulous logic, of course, that was offered is, if you are not with us, then you are with the enemy. So Ambedkar had to brace all these kinds of aspects that have been put up very very strongly against him. But however, among all those who engaged in public life in the last century and subsequently revered as nation builders, friends, I would like to emphasize that it was only Ambedkar, alone Ambedkar, who has frontally and intellectually confronted the concept of nation and nationalism and has warned, underlined the elusive reality of nation and nationalism in this country. So any like serious student of this subject, and also in fact now gets into the contributions of Ambedkar both on theoretical basis, at the same time at the practical in fact now like implications, he stands unique and head and shoulders above any of those who have been like in a sense labeled as nation builders of this country. So having said so, let us look into Ambedkar's theory and practice of nationalism, because I'd like to get into the very definitions, in fact, of nation or nationalism, which Dr. Ambedkar chose to give with regard to the peculiar and special conditions in India. Friends, we know pretty well the area of nation or nation building has been for a long time the forte of historians and then political scientists. Recently, uh, we see some sociologists and anthropologists delving into this particular area. But friends, Ambedkar already in his own times, he was trying to grapple with the notion of nation as a larger and egalitarianly imagined solidarity. And his elaborate articulations reveal the breadth and depth of the his reading on this subject, grasp of the principles, his interpretations to the theory building itself. So we understand, in fact, now he was venting out his thoughts within the vortex of multifarious struggles for modern India. This is to be understood and underlined actually. He is seriously involved in the deconstruction of what was then being hegemonically foisted, in fact, now as nationalism, which is rather being labeled as Indian nationalism. And Ambedkar was projecting a liberative theory of nation and nationalism. So this is the premise upon which, in fact, now we look into how Ambedkar went ahead to define nation, nationality, and the category of nationalism from the Indian point of view. So let us look at the definitions actually. I would like to request the organizer to mute the newcomers, please. Yeah, thank you. So when we are trying to look at Ambedkar's like a contribution to the theory and practice of nationalism, so we will look into is the very definitions of what he considers to be nation, nationalism, and what is to be called as a nationalist actually. So in the common parlance, nationalism in fact now is understood primarily as a political concept, meaning an ideology which provides basis for national integration and cohesion actually, as well as seeking a national independence from colonial or semi-colonial rule or of imperial powers. So generally nationalism is understood as a kind of a political strife uh, to gain such kind of a what do you call a liberty or kind of an independence from the forces that have been in fact dominating. As the politics is concerned, it is also concerned with the expression of economics actually. So often political nationalism, particularly in its early phases, gets manifest in the economic demands as well. So one in fact may also call it as an economic nationalism. But friends, Ambedkar categorically states that nationality is not such a sacrosanct and absolute principle as to give it the character of a categorical imperative overriding other circumstances. He was not attaching himself either to the political or to the economic. He has, in fact, now very well, penchant to emphasize the social angle to it. Actually, among other scholars, Ambedkar on this subject drew heavily from French, political scientist Ernest Renan. See, he chose to premise the social dimension of nationalism, especially in the Indian society. This social relational dimension calls for something called as the consciousness of kind, or the daily plebiscite, as Renan chooses to define. And the similar social orientation, in fact, no, has been expressed by Carl Dewes as social communication, and almost near with very very close to this kind of say expression is found with Ernest Gellner when he says universalization of the clerisy. And the very famed political scientist Benedict Anderson, he chose to term this particular similar feeling of the social relational dimension of nationalism as horizontal camaraderie. And Ambedkar's own teacher, Professor John Dewey, calls this as a social endosmosis. And for Ambedkar, the same concept, in fact, now he tried to express in the terms such as social amalgamation and social merger. So therefore, friends, for Ambedkar, the concept of nation and nationalism, or even nationality, basically, for that matter, he premises the social relations aspect rather than, in fact, no other aspects such as political, say economic, or even cultural kind of a nationalism. So now we look into what exactly Ambedkar, in fact, now defines nation. In his discourse, Ambedkar defines nation, I quote, as a power homogenized fraternity. These are, like, in a sense, wonderfully couched kind of a terms. He calls nation as a power homogenized fraternity, a democratic unity. And he goes ahead, says that nation is a new social formation which is characterized by consciousness of unity and fraternity, leading to increased, intensified, but also non-discriminate social exchanges. So see the like in a sense the grasp of the definition. Actually, he was thoroughly, in fact, now rooting it in the kind of a social non-discriminate social exchanges where you have fraternity at the center of all these kinds of social relational exchanges. And Ambedkar terms, in fact, now nation as that kind of a fraternity where power is homogenized across all the citizens that make up a nation. So friends, this is rather quite unusual. We find Ambedkar taking up entirely kind of a unique stand as to look at a nation and also nationalism, actually. So indeed, Ambedkar says nation is the social cultural dimension of democracy. This is considered as a kind of a daring intellectual move because Ambedkar deploys the term democracy and identifies it with the nation state. And he goes on to talk about, in fact, now the two dimensions as to what is a nation, going by this kind of an understanding, and what would be the state, that is, in fact, now the governance. So Ambedkar says the nation Ambedkar says the nation, in fact, now can be looked at the social dimension, which is expressive of formation of fraternity, suffused with individual liberty and relational equality. So he is terming nation, basically taking up this from the social dimension, as an expressive of the formation of fraternity. Again, coming back to the social aspect, with individual liberty and relational equality, actually. And what would be the state? The definition of state from Ambedkar's perspective: the state is the political dimension which is expressed through the matching juridical, institutional rules of law, rationalized bureaucracy, and uniformized citizenship. So these are the precise, in fact, now say definitions as a student of political science, where of course we understand that Ambedkar, in fact, now studied political science as one of his minor subjects in Columbia University. So he brings in that kind of an aspect and makes his own definitions, makes up his own, in fact, now formulations, premising the very reality of Indian society. So therefore, friends, here he was defining the nation, in fact, now from the perspective of social, relational, and then political relations. And now he goes ahead and he says that there is a difference between nationality and nationalism. And he says there are two different psychological states of human mind. Now he moves from the social to the psychological realm while dealing with these two aspects, actually. And he says nationality means consciousness of kind, awareness of the existence of that tie of kinship. I repeat, nationality means consciousness of kind, awareness of the existence of that tie of kinship. Then he defines nationalism, which means the desire for a separate national existence for those who are bound by this tie of kinship. So this is where he is trying to very personal, finitely, like in a sense, making up the cleavage of what is nationality. We look at once again, nationality is the consciousness of the kind and awareness of the existence of kinship. Nationality is the desire for a separate national existence for those who are bound up by that sort of a kinship. So these are two psychological dimensions which Ambedkar brings in theoretically defining what is nation, nationality, and then nationalism, actually. He says that it is true that there cannot be nationalism without the feeling of nationality being in existence. But it is important to bear in mind that the converse is not always true. So therefore, friends, Ambedkar, in fact, now like moves from the social relational aspect of nation and nationality, and then within that particular social relational aspect, he stresses upon the psychological aspect of that particular feeling of nationality and then expressions of nationalism. He says that nationality is a subjective psychological feeling. It is a feeling of corporate sentiment of oneness, which makes those who are charged with it feel that they are kith and kin. So they emotionally, in fact, get charged that whenever there is a nation, they say that we are all one. We all, in fact, have that consciousness of kind, that we reflect or relate to each other as kith and kin. And having said so, friends, Ambedkar did not stop there. He also went ahead to warn that national feeling is a double-edged sword. He said national feeling is a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged feeling. It is at once feeling of fellowship for one's own kith and anti-fellowship feeling for those who are not one's own kith. This is some sort of a, like in a sense, those who belong to my clan, I feel that they are my own, and it's a feeling I exert towards them. At the same time, I separate, I make a kind of a distinction as to who do not become my kith and kin. So this is a kind of a, like in a sense, a double-edged kind of feeling that nationality exerts. He says that nationality, in fact, that feeling of consciousness of kind which binds together those who are within the limits of the kindred and severs from those who are outside the limits of the kindred. So this is in the narrow sense, in fact, no, the kindred becomes, in fact, no, the feelings of national feelings of power, homogenized fraternity are expressed within those people whom we feel that we are, they are our kith and kin, our kindred. So he says that, in fact, no, it is a longing to belong to one's group and a longing not to belong to any other group. So this sort of a problematic also can be found when we look at, in fact, the feelings of nationalism or nationality. But Ambedkar says this is the essence of what is called nationality and national feeling. This longing to belong to one's own kindred is a subjective social feeling. But he says that what is important to bear in mind is that this longing to belong is not just to one's own kindred, and it is quite dependent of geography, culture, economic, or even, in fact, no, a social conflict. So there he says that that feeling of the kindred should surpass all those social categories, should, in fact, no, surpass all those narrowly bound of geographical, rather, in fact, no, any other kind of cultural these things. And it should, in fact, no, the people who are called as citizens, they must imbibe this national feeling of enjoying a power homogenized fraternity if they want to build up a nation or even nationalism. So therefore, by saying so, Ambedkar was very close to Eric Hobsbawm, another political scientist, who mentioned that independence movements should not be confused with nationalism. This is where he says, like Eric Hobsbawm says, that all independence movements, in fact, no, are not, cannot, in fact, no, politically considered as, in fact, no, a nationalist kind of a movement, because there is always a difference between, in fact, no, getting an independence and building up a nation. So, friends, having looked into what are the definitions of Ambedkar with regard to these three aspects of nation, nationalism, and also, in fact, no, a nationalist kind of a feeling, I would like to present major 5 points, in fact, no, on Ambedkar's ideas on the two questions of nation and nationalism. I want to delve in 5 points, actually, to be precise. I think so. In this time-bound kind of a discussion of ours, I want to bring in these 5 aspects as to how Ambedkar, in fact, now very, very crucially pondered into these aspects, and then came up with very, very important understandings on nationalism and nation in India. So the first one, which I would like to call it, in fact, now, as Ambedkar's studied response to the pervasive anti-colonial rhetoric by the entrenched castes of India. So this is where he was very openly exposing that kind of entrenched castes in this country and their understanding of what is to be called as nationalism. So this is, in fact, no, rather in terms of Ronald Robinson, Ambedkar, in fact, no, calls it as exposing the collusive colonialism. These are the rather, in fact, no, a very, very harsh kind of an understanding. Yes, but it's true. Ambedkar was exposing that collusive colonialism between the entrenched castes in India and, in fact, no, the colonial powers of the British at the time. So therefore, if you look into this particular angle, the public political intervention of Ambedkar came about during the most crucial period of modern Indian history. That is the decline of colonialism, rise of nationalism of the Indian kind, transfer of power, formation of the new nation state during the first half of the 20th century. The single most pervasive and persistent issue of contestation was understandably the appropriation of power, especially of the centralized power being released by the imperialistic forces, that is the British, as to who should, in fact, know, like say, claim the leadership, claim the ownership of, in fact, now controlling the affairs of India when the British depart from this country. That has been the anxiety, in fact, now with which the entrenched castes have involved in a kind of a Indian type of nationalism. So this nationalism operated like two-edged sword in the observation of Ambedkar. The demand for the removal of British constituted the external dimension. The second dimension, in fact, involved disciplining the nearly insurgent masses and bringing them within the colonially valorized Brahminical tradition. So these are the two angles that Ambedkar is showing with the discourse of nationalism that took place in India as an Indian nationalistic brand. He was saying that it is not entirely, in fact, no, completely talking about, say, making a nation and then wherein all citizens becoming an integral and equal part of it. Ambedkar talking about this collusive colonization as the entrenched caste, in fact, now used in two ways. One is to see that the British, in fact, now was removed from that pedestal of power, and at the same time disciplining the masses, the majority of the masses, within that kind of a couching within that Brahminical tradition. So therefore, Ambedkar said that time political unity is not sufficient for a nation. He was saying that Indian national struggle in the first half of 20th century was merely a struggle to wrest political power from the foreign rule. And he says that it is a partial fight for political freedom. He says that, including the Congress, he says, they're all fighting only for political power. And Ambedkar said, a political power, political freedom, a political freedom gives freedom to the boundaries of a nation, which Ambedkar calls it as a cartographic nationalism, kind of a freedom or a cartographic nationalism. But Ambedkar said, I am fighting for the political power, along with it, importantly, the social freedom. Actually, he said, I'm interested in fighting for political freedom along with the social freedom. And he says, the social freedom not just gives freedom to the boundaries of a nation, but it gives freedom to every individual within the boundaries of that particular nation. So he said that is a durable, that is the real kind of a freedom, and for that kind of a nationalism one should fight for. So that is the reason, in fact, now he was blaming all other rest of the groups, the Congress and the other subsidiary and the all sundry. He says all these figures, they are fighting only for political freedom, and they have been very conveniently forgetting the social freedom, which is very, very important in the Indian context. So therefore, he says, he goes ahead, in fact, now says that he refused to see any significant difference between Congress, which claimed to be a secular body, and the Hindu Mahasabha at that time, which was later to be turned into Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, which was avowedly sectarian, actually. That time, in fact, now Congress, in fact, now was having a secular political kind of a pretense, where Hindu Mahasabha was predominantly a sectarian, and it talks about any kind of a religious kind of a nationalism. But Ambedkar sees a kind of a connection between these two. And as Romila Thapar later explained, she said, I quote, these bodies, both Congress and Hindu Mahasabha, these bodies were concerned, despite their declarations, not with the nation making, but with the formation of a traditionally unified Hindu community in the modern times, unquote. That's what Romila Thapar also, in fact, observes. So therefore, Ambedkar said, again, reiterating the same kind of a thing, I quote, Ambedkar said, indeed, if the British rule has achieved anything in India, it is to strengthen and reinvigorate Brahminism, which is the spirit of inequality. So this is the very severe complaint that Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, now making against the British colonial rule. He is saying that if the rule has achieved anything in India in the social plane, it has strengthened Brahminism, which has been the spirit of inequality. And therefore, Ambedkar says, and I quote again, even if the British departed from India, the landlords, the mill owners, and the entrenched castes, they continued to bleed the producer caste. With, in fact, it did not means anything, and in fact, like in a sense, for reasons of modicum and all, he was thoroughly exposing what the entrenched caste in the name of Indian nationalism has been doing. They have been doing actually. And Ambedkar's struggle, my dear friends, constituted a part of that internal struggle of nation in the making. One of the divergent and sometimes conflicting currents of all which help to secure freedom both from the external and also from the internal oppression and enslavement. This is what Ambedkar says means the real freedom or means the real nationalistic kind of struggle. We want freedom, liberation both from the external as well as the internal Brahminical, in fact, no enslavement and bondage. And he says this is the real nationalism, and this is what exactly can be called in his own terms as a nation in the making actually. So therefore, my dear friends, looking into the depth of his kind of an understanding and the severity of his treatment of this particular topic, Ambedkar, in fact, is an example par excellence of political liberative nationalism, which we can call it as his nationalism, politically and socially liberative nationalism, engaged in the moral and mortal conflict with what could only be described as the worst ever form of cultural chauvinist, but unfortunately hegemonic nationalism in India. So, therefore, my dear friends, Ambedkar's nationalist expressions indeed sum up, systematize, interpret that and ideologically carry forward these mass aspirations towards a new society, a modern society, which is devoid of, in fact, no all kinds of, in fact, no like in a sense oppressions and also dissensions and secessions. So, therefore, friends, this is the first point which I would like to bring to you in this point of a discourse. Ambedkar would like to expose the collusive colonization of the external forces, the British, and at the same time the colonization of the internal, called as the Brahminical colonization. And he was out to fight with both actually. And the second point, which is, in fact, I'd like to bring to you, is that his meticulous elaboration of the incompatibility of the Varna caste model of social relations with the modern national egalitarian forms actually. He was saying that these caste inequalities are Varna caste model of inequalities, and that sort of a life, which of course is called influenced with the Brahminical ideology, is thoroughly incompatible with what we call it as a democratic nationalism actually. So that is what he wants to show at the second as kind of this thing. So we know, friends, Ambedkar stood in opposition to the nationalist classes. He was calling them, in fact, taunting them as nationalist classes without much nationalism in the true worth of his salt. The nationalist classes, aggressive imposition of social hierarchicalism. His struggle is to lay foundation of a modern India by purging out, like in a sense, all the outmodel social institutions, practices, beliefs, attitudes. So he was making, in fact, very, very caustic and quite, in fact, insightful observations, where he was saying that the belief that Hindu social system has been perfected for all time by their ancestors who had the superhuman vision of all eternity and supernatural power for making infinite provision for future ages. This deep ingrained ethnocentrism has prevented the reconstruction of the Hindu society and stood in the way of a revision of vested rights for the common good and formation of a really nationalistic say sentiments in this country. This is where he was saying very clearly. See, the country, in fact, had an ethnocentric vision, saying that everything is perfected, as in fact, like in a sense, the common catchphrase that everything is there in the Vedas. Ambedkar says this is a very, very sloppy kind of a thing, and everything has been perfected even to the future. Ambedkar says that ethnocentric view of these people has become, in fact, now a stumbling block for remodeling, restructuring the Indian society on the like egalitarian nation making. So he says, and again I quote, there is an utter lack among the Hindus what the sociologists call consciousness of kind. There is no consciousness of kind. In every Hindu, the consciousness that exists is the consciousness of his caste. That is the reason why he said they cannot be said to form a society or a nation. Very categorically, he was saying. He says India is not a nation at all, and India has not yet become a nation. He was observing. This country is divided as many into as in fact now more than 5,000 castes. Besides this, there are the evils like casteism, provincialism, religious differences, and numerous other conflicts and quarrels which divide the country. Unquote. And he also says that you ask anybody, an Indian, for the reasons whether you have a kind of a nation or what, they say we are a nation. How would you become a nation? Ambedkar says that they say that, and they will say that India is a nation, firstly, because India has a geographical unity of the country, and secondly, because of the fundamental unity of the culture. And Ambedkar asks, what was that fundamental unity of culture? Other than, in fact, no, the unequal social structure and all those kind of, in fact, no, say religious, sanctions that it brings in. So therefore, he says that he explains systematically the incompatibility of caste relations with the modern nation. Whilst the former, the caste relations, were there exclusive, divisive, and discriminatory in nature, the modern society or the modern nation, Ambedkar says, it is inclusive, integrative, and egalitarian in the principle participatory parity. So therefore, Ambedkar says caste in its system as well as in its spirit is incompatible with democracy. So that is where he was very clearly talking about the whole thing. And another dimension which Ambedkar says that the formation of nationalism vis-a-vis the existing village system. Ambedkar, in fact, now looks into that kind of a dimension. And here he says, I quote, if India has not succeeded in producing nationalism, if India has not succeeded in building up a national spirit, the chief reason for that, in my opinion, is the existence of village system. This has to be this is another dimension which Ambedkar very categorically brings in. And he says, I continue, the village system made all people saturated with local patriotism. It left no room for larger civic spirit, none whatever. This is where, in fact, no, he was talking on the village panchayat bill way back in 1920s when he was the member of the Bombay Legislative Council. He was expressing these views then and there itself. And when Gandhi was eulogizing, in fact, no, the villages as little republics, Ambedkar had to confront. He said, I quote, he said, what after all are villages? They're dens of ignorance, sinks of localism, and cesspools of casteism. This is exactly what Ambedkar says. The village structure itself, in fact, it perpetuates the Varna caste kind of a say like inequality, and it is an impediment, in fact, no, the formation of nationalism and national spirit of this particular country. And he wanted, in fact, no, a kind of a revision of this particular thing. And he says that nation, in fact, no, should be a like-mindedness, and there should be solidarity among the socially divided groups, actually, if at all there are any. And he goes with an extensive survey of different countries in the world, and he compares right from, in fact, no, that in those days the East European countries, the Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. He in fact no, goes ahead even to Japan, where when they are forming a nation, those societies were ready initially to bury, in fact, no, all those differences based on the ethnic kind of a differences. When they failed, so we have seen what we have seen, in fact, no, in the later days when Czechoslovakia, in fact, no, got divided into Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Slovakia. We also have seen, in fact, no, the Czechs, in fact, no, becoming other kind of. This is where they could not handle that kind of a ethnic, kind of a differences. And Ambedkar says that handling is very, very crucial for the formation of a nation. That's what where he says that it is a power, so power homogenized fraternity. And Ambedkar says that without the decimating of those kind of differences, nationalism in India, he says that it is another kind of imperialism. So he says that first there is a difference between nationality, of course, and also of the nationalism. He says that nationality, in fact, no, is expression of the kind of a flame into nationalism, for which the two conditions are important. He says that there must arise the will to live as a nation. That is the first condition. The will to live as a nation. That means the citizens, in fact, no, should feel that those other citizens, all of the citizens, in fact, no, there should be a longing to belong. That is what we have seen in the. And second is nationalism must be, in fact, no, having that dynamic expression of that desire. And second, he says that there must be a territory which nationalism could occupy and make it a state, as well as the cultural home of the nation. This is where, in fact, now everybody should feel that they are a part of it, and a burning desire must be there, in fact, now to make this as a homogenized kind of a fraternity. So this is where he says, with regard to the question of, in fact, no meaning of independence for the ex-untouchables, Ambedkar says, I quote, I am no opponent of independence. If I can be assured that I could have independence, education, welfare, which are promised to the nation, I certainly will fight for that independence, for that nationalism, and for full freedom. But if all this is a tall talk, tall philosophy, and followed by nothing else, then I would rather call it as one-step dance. That's what Ambedkar, in fact, no, was calling. Even in 1956, the year he died, he said, in India, democracy in the hands of the Brahminical groups, it has turned out to be a one-step dance. Like it's not moving anywhere. It appears that it's moving somewhere ahead and all, but Ambedkar says it was standing as it was, where it stands actually. It's a one-step dance. So therefore, friends, Ambedkar very clearly says on this point that, I quote, without social union, political unity is difficult to be achieved. If achieved, it would be as precarious as a summer sapling, liable to be uprooted by a gusty wind. I continue. With mere political unity, India may have a state. He says that with mere political unity, India may have a state, that is, India may have a government. But to be a state is not to be a nation. That is where he's making a difference between what is a state or a government and what is a nation actually. Has, like in a sense, if there is no, like in a social unity, the state has small prospects of survival. That is where he was thoroughly warning. But my dear friends, he is not entirely out of hope. And he mentioned, saying that, I quote, but my, like, of course, he was emphasizing that, in fact, no, unless the social order is changed, no progress can be achieved. The community cannot be mobilized either for offense or defense. Nothing can be built on the foundations of caste. No morality, no nation. So this is his categorical, in fact, no statement, saying that nothing can be found on the basis or the foundations of caste. No nation and no morality. This is where he was saying. But as I said, friends, earlier, he was not entirely pessimistic. He was saying, I quote, but my confident hope is that we can be a nation provided proper processes of social amalgamation are set forth, unquote. Here he was saying that social amalgamation, in fact, no, is important. Nation, as he said, was a power homogenized fraternity, and he was also saying nation or nationalism is a consciousness of kind, the longing to belong to the same kind of, in fact, like in a sense, social group and all. And he was saying nation is a social amalgamation. So this is the point which, in fact, no, the second point which I want to bring to you, my dear friends, as the understanding of Ambedkar on nation and nationalism. The third aspect is his applicational part of it, actually. When he was trying to look into the intervention, in fact, when the two nation theory and formulation has been happening, Ambedkar was very, very concerned with regard to the formation, in fact, or the basis of the formation of these two nations. He was, of course, very, very, like in a sense, what do you call, positive for the, so like in a sense, division of India into two countries. He was writing, in fact, no one else during that time has completely dwelled into very deeply into that particular subject. And the in the book that he wrote, Thoughts on Pakistan or Partition of India, that was the title of the book he wrote, Thoughts on Pakistan or Partition of India, wherein that has been a masterpiece, in fact, where he was dwelling into the aspects of Indian society, and how, in fact, now it is very difficult for incompatibility of the Muslim League to work with, to be in the Indian Union, wherein we must understand it is not against the Muslims, my dear friends. Muslim League represents the Brahminical caste within the Muslims. Those who are, in fact, now converted from the Brahmins, those who are converted from the, say, Thakurs and also Baniyas, the trading communities like Jinnah and all, they form the political party called as Muslim League. And the vast majority of the Muslims, even today, who constitute, in fact, now 15% of the population, they were not with the Muslim League. They wanted a unified India, and they called their party as the Mumin Conference way back in 1926. The Mumin Conference consisted of the majority Muslims who are from the OBCs and scheduled castes. They wanted to be in this country, and they continue to be in India, actually. So we need to understand these dynamics. And Ambedkar very vehemently talking about, in fact, now how the Muslim League cannot, in fact, now be a part of this particular country with all their kind of expressions. So when it going by the very formation of these two nations, Ambedkar was very, very critical of that particular formation. In those days, the formation was like Hindu, Hindi, Hindustan, Muslim, Urdu, Pakistan. And Ambedkar was thoroughly critical of this formation. What was that? It is basically the religion, the language, and the nation. Hindu as religion, Hindi as language, and Hindustan as a nation or a geographical kind of region. Muslim as a religion, Urdu as a language, and Pakistan as a kind of a geography. This is what he called the time, in fact, no, as they are not founding, in fact, no, their nation on the modern kind of a society, but it was, in fact, no, these formulations are based on ancient, archaic, and traditional kind of a society, where later on, in fact, in some other part, when he wrote a preface where he was quoting Bible, in that particular Bible where he was talking about, like he was writing to his friend F, he was quoting, in fact, no, what Ruth was talking to Naomi. When Naomi, as in fact, no, like the mother-in-law, when her son died, she told Ruth, you can go back to your people, you can go back to your nation, you may not stay here. Actually, there Ruth says to her mother-in-law, your gods are my gods, your people are my people, your country is my country. So there Ambedkar says, in ancient society, there is a connection between the religion, the kind of the people, the society, and the country. So similarly, when he is saying that, in fact, no, when the two nation theory and the formulations are there, he was saying it was the same old archaic, same old, in fact, no, traditional kind of a formulation. And he was saying that even this formulation, however, in fact, no, is based on the shaky grounds, it was there on false grounds. He was saying that these two formulations are on the false premises, where he says that all Indians are not Hindus, and all Indians do not speak Hindi, and this is not Hindustan for that matter, of course, which of course the current forces are trying to make it as a Hindu Rashtra. But at the same time, he critiqued all those people who are there in Pakistan are not Muslims, and all those people in Pakistan do not speak Urdu. Urdu is otherwise, in fact, called as Hindustani. Urdu is a language born in India, as in fact, a confluence of Persian and then some sort of a tinge of Sanskrit, which was called as Hindustani. He says that is not the language of all people of Pakistan, and therefore he says that it is not that the formulations of these countries, those factors are not just ancient, traditional, but they are on the false grounds. So he was like, this is another area, like in a sense, Ambedkar dwelt at length as to formation of these two nations, actually, whether they really can become a nation or not. And many of his observations, friends, if you look into those things, because paucity of time, I'm not looking into that particular point. I'm just making a passing reference, because even in the treaty called as Thoughts on Pakistan or Partition of India, his intellectual, in fact, say kind of a statesman comes up, in fact, in quite in clear terms, how these two nations, even if they are formed, would be very, very on shaky grounds, would never be solid grounds, actually. And another point, the fourth point, which I want to bring to you, this thing is, my friends, with regard to nation and kind of a nation building. He was the lone voice in the process of reorganization of states in Indian Republic. When India, in fact, become in fact a nation state, for almost over a long time, there was no cool-headed thought or a kind of, in fact, informed kind of a discussion as to how this republic, which has been formed out of 3/4 of the erstwhile British India and 1/4 of more than 500 plus princely states, when all these formulations came into and formed into Indian Republic, and how the provinces have to be formed, how the whole nation has to be divided into, in fact, administratively viable provinces or provincial states. It was a tragedy, in fact, in India, that no state has been formed out of cool and level-headed thinking. All the states, starting with the formation of, in fact, the demand for Andhra state, which was the first, and of course, the state of Orissa has been formed in 1936 itself, when Congress party, in fact, was favoring that particular thing. It happened, the state of Orissa took place in even during the colonial period. But in the post-independent India, Andhras were the first people, in fact, to call for a secessionism from the Madras presidency. We know pretty well. They went for, in fact, arson. There was a hunger strike by Potti Sriramulu, and they created a sign of, in fact, a condition of an emergency where, like in a sense, a kind of a public disharmony, where the demand was so intense, emotional, and Nehru and other people, in fact, they had to hurriedly form the Andhra state, actually. And then there was a demand for giving away the Madras city to Andhra, actually. And then, in fact, there was still a kind of a tension between the Tamils and then the Telugus. And as a kind of a, what do you call, we know pretty well, as a kind of a compromise, Tirupati was given to Andhra, and then Chennai was kept, with the Tamils. So we know pretty well. Then the next formulation was, in fact, the formation of states of Maharashtra and Gujarat. When the Gujaratis, in fact, went haywire, they were torching everywhere, and there was a lot of arson, looting, and there was a lot of, in fact, unrest for the separation of Gujarat from the Madras state, Maharashtra state. Even there also, when Gujarat state was forming, the Gujaratis were demanding for inclusion of Bombay city into their state, actually. So therefore, like all this melee, Ambedkar was the only one. Friends, he was the only one. Since 1950, he wrote 4 articles, full-fledged articles, as to how India should be reorganized into states. No other known public intellectual, no other political scientist worth the salt in this India, in this country, in those days or even after, were very, very, like a particular, very much interested as to see how this republic has to be partitioned on sound, thoughtful, say kind of a thinking, actually thoughtful formulation. So that was where Ambedkar came up with, in fact, no thoughts on linguistic states. He wrote Maharashtra as a linguistic province, and his other important book is Linguistic Provinces as Nationalities. And then he was writing very thoroughly about Andhra and the unviability of Andhra in 1951 as a kind of a separate state. He was saying that Andhra, that time, in fact, the state doesn't have the sources of power generation. He was saying there is no coal mine in Andhra. There was no possibility of having hydroelectric projects. And therefore, he said, Andhra, in fact, now would become a Sahara. And of course, later on, when in fact, no, the erstwhile Nizam kingdom has been trifurcated, when Telangana came and merged with Andhra to make Andhra Pradesh, Ambedkar again was talking about it, actually. And Ambedkar also wrote thoughts on smaller states, actually. He wrote 4 important premises as a statesman. No other political scientist, actually, or no other politician, including the stalwarts like, in fact, no, Nehru and the other ilk, they never thought of, in fact, having these things. All these states have been formed under emergency like situations where there was a lot of looting, arson, and sloganeering, and then fighting for, in fact, no separate kind of a thing. So here, I'm not going to go deep into this, but Ambedkar, many people were saying that Ambedkar was in the favor of smaller states. Ambedkar, my dear friends, he himself wrote, yes, he wanted smaller states for the feasibility of sound administration, but small or big, he himself wrote saying that they are all relative. It is not the size of the state, small or big, that matters. He said very categorically, he is for a standard state. A standard state, and he said there are 6 factors which makes a standard state. So that is the reason why, like in a sense, when there was a demand for separate Telangana, there were, in fact, now some Ambedkarites who were saying that whether Telangana befits the criteria of these standard states, and they were saying that yes, it fulfills those kinds of things and all. So therefore, my dear friends, Ambedkar was not just, in fact, not thinking about a nation as a geographical entity, nation, in fact, not just as a nation state, India is not just as a republic, but he was very, very importantly thinking about how it should be administered as a provincial kind of a states as well. So he was the lone voice. That is the 4th point, in fact, now I want to bring out the nation in the making in terms of, in fact, now Ambedkar's thought and formulations. And the 5th point which I want to bring to you is the Ambedkar's systematic exposition of the nature and activities of these nationalist class, which we were calling them as the Brahminical sections of this country, or Ambedkar himself called as the entrenched castes of this country. So he was very critical of their behavior, even after formation of an independent India. He was saying that, I quote, India is a peculiar country, and her nationalists and patriots are a peculiar people. A patriot and a nationalist in India is one who sees with open eyes his fellow men treated as being less than human being. But his humanity does not raise in protest. This patriot's one cry and the only cry is power, and more power for himself and his caste. He says, I am glad I do not belong to that class of patriots. I quote. So he says, in fact, now in the retrospect, how can these people, in fact, now were thinking that they are qualified enough to demand, in fact, now a freedom or a separate nation from the British? And where he was saying, I quote, this nationalistic imperialism, he was talking about nationalistic imperialism, cannot well ask the help of British imperialists to thwart the right of a minority to freedom from the nationalism of an aggressive majority, unquote. He was making them threadbare. He was exposing that collusive colonization which we are talking about actually. And he was also warning about the misuse of nationalism, where Ambedkar is saying and I quote, instead of surrendering the privileges in the name of nationalism, this governing class of India is using, rather misusing the slogan of nationalism to maintain its privileges. Whenever the servile classes ask for their share, this governing class raised the cry of nationalism in danger. Unquote. This is where he was very thoroughly exposing. When these producing castes or the lower castes of this country, as citizens, when they raise, in fact, no, their share in the nation, the so-called, in fact, no, nationalists from the entrenched caste, they bring up the bogey of nationalism is in danger. They drive the attention, in fact, no, for the national security, other things and all. They do not want to, in fact, no, address these issues and all. This sort of a, what do you call, like like in the sense hypocrisy, Ambedkar has very well warned and also mentioned very clear terms actually. So friends, what is that Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, no, expected from a kind of a true kind of a nation or nationalism in this country? From where to where he want to build up this country in his own kind of a, understanding and his own kind of vision. I'd like to draw, my dear friends, again to 1930-31, when Ambedkar, in fact, now attended the first roundtable conference in London, where he was putting forward, in fact, no, his argument for separate electorates as separate representations for the, in fact, no, separate identity of the people who were that time, in fact, no, who were ex-untouchables and all. And then he was preparing to set forth for the second roundtable conference in 1931 and 2 actually. Mr. Gandhi, even though he had an invitation to attend the roundtable conference, first roundtable conference in 1930, chose not to go. But when he has seen, in fact, now what was happening as the legitimate, in fact, no arguments for representation, including Ambedkar's very sound reasoning for a separate electorate, Gandhi has decided, in fact, no, to attend the second roundtable conference. Before going so, Gandhi called for Dr. Ambedkar to talk to him actually. So Ambedkar obliged and went to Gandhiji's place, and this particular say meeting was very well recorded by M.M. Desai, the secretary of, in fact, the personal secretary of Gandhiji. So in that talk, Gandhiji, in fact, mistook Ambedkar. Later on, in fact, M.M. Desai said, Gandhi told us, his secretary, I was thinking Ambedkar was a reformistic Brahmin, an educated reformistic Brahmin, trying to, in fact, fight for the against the social evils, and he never took Ambedkar, in fact, as belonging to the ex-untouchable caste that time. Actually, Gandhi acknowledged for talking to. So then Dr. Ambedkar said, he started saying that Gandhiji talked about, in fact, how his separate demand, in fact, hurts India, other things and all. Ambedkar replied by saying, Gandhiji, I have no motherland. This is what Ambedkar said at that time in 1930-31 to Gandhi. Gandhiji, I have no motherland. To which Dr. Ambedkar Gandhi seemingly, in fact, moved and said, as per the information I received, I know that you're a patriot of sterling worth. That's what Gandhi talked to Ambedkar. I understand that you are a patriot of sterling worth. So Ambedkar started from that premise. He was saying that in this country, how can I say this is my country, where we are not being treated more better than, in fact, even worse than animals. We do not have any kind of a civic kind of a thing. Ambedkar went on, in fact, saying that, how can I call this as a motherland? Friends, Ambedkar started from that premise and moved to a stage where he said his mission is to elevate the members of caste into the citizens of, in fact, a democratic nation. That is what he said. My mission is to elevate the members of caste to make them into the equal citizens of a democratic nation. That is where he was premising, in fact, no citizens of equality. That is where, in fact, no, he was premising that kind of a nationalistic, kind of a this thing, that kind of a formulation of nation was the dream of Ambedkar. He says, my mission is to elevate the members of the caste who are, in fact, no confined only to, in fact, no, their own caste-based nationalities, to create one unified nation and make them, in fact, no each individual as equal citizens in that particular kind of a nation. So that is the reason why in 1945, Dr. Ambedkar says, when he was saying in 1931 that I have no motherland, Ambedkar was so, like, in a sense, confident, saying that it is my people who shall decide the destiny of this country. He went to that kind of a proportion. So that is where, my dear friends, actually Ambedkar wanted to strive and formulate, in fact, no, a right kind of nation, and then right spirit of nationalism. So in the same spirit, friends, it is not out of place, and it's much essential. We need to talk about, in fact, no, the contemporary nationalism that's happening amidst in this country post Ambedkar, actually. And Ambedkar says very categorically, as I said, I also want to quote, what is the worth of independence? Ambedkar thinks that, what is the worth of this independent kind of a nation? He said, and I quote, the worth of independence depends upon the kind of government and the kind of society that is built up. So this is where he was clearly premising the social and the political aspect of it, the nation and the state, where we started, in fact, Ambedkar's definition of what is a nation and what is the state, what is the government, basically, and Ambedkar's definition of the feelings of nationality and, in fact, nationalism. So he says that the worth of independence depends upon the kind of government and the kind of society that is built up. There is not much value in independence in the form of government and the order of the society are to be those against which the world is fighting today. 1953, Ambedkar says that the world is fighting for a modern democratic states, actually. But Ambedkar says, if the independence that we have got is still grappling, is still languishing in the same old, like, in a sense, archaic society, same old unequal society, or same old, in fact, prejudices, then there is no worth of, in fact, independence at all. He was saying the worth of independence, in fact, depends upon the kind of government and the kind of a society that is built up. And the appeal of new India, he says, with a new social order. That's what he very, very clearly talks about. The appeal of new India is with a new social order, and it is bound up with a greater than the appeal of independence. Indeed, the vision of new order in a new India would very greatly strengthen the determination to win freedom. That is what Ambedkar is saying. The vision of new social order in a new India would be very greatly strengthen the determination to win freedom. So therefore, friends, that is the kind of a perfect premise of Dr. Ambedkar, the vision of a perfected nation for a highly discriminative society of India. So friends, that is where, in fact, he was talking, where he was saying, I want all people to be Indian first, Indian last, and nothing else but Indians. See the kind of an affirmative that he was using. See, when it comes to the aspect of nationalism and being, in fact, a nationalist, Ambedkar said, I am better than any kind of nationalist in this country. He has got the like that kind of a confidence to say that I am better than any kind of a nationalist in this country. And he was emphasizing, I want all people to be Indian first, Indian last, and nothing else but Indians. What do you mean by nothing else? Nothing else means irrespective of caste, creed, religion, region, gender, all must be, in fact, equitable, in fact, citizens. That is what he says, that a nation must be a power homogenized fraternity. A nation must be a social amalgamation. That is exactly what we lack today, my dear friends. Even after 75 years of independence, that is exactly what Ambedkar wanted, and that is exactly what we lack today, actually. We even lack the kind of, in fact, the determination to look into those things. And Ambedkar said, in these days, he was talking, any claim for sharing power by the minority is called communalism. Any claim for the sharing of power by the minority is called communalism, while monopolizing the whole power by the majority is called nationalism. This is what is Ambedkar says, a perverted nationalism that India has. I would like to repeat it once again. Any claim for the sharing of power by the minority is called communalism, while monopolizing the whole power by the majority is being called as nationalism. This is the faulty and defective nationalism that India has. And of course, like in a sense, now today, we see many formulations of, in fact, now nationalism. We are, in fact, now going into that kind of a cultural nationalism, rather, in fact, now religious nationalism. The positions that they want to turn India into a religious state, a religious nation. And that is, in fact, now what they're being. And Ambedkar's, say, like Ambedkar's, what do you call? He's what do you call, like in a sense, contempt for the Congress basically is that they are inadvertently facilitating that kind of those kinds of forces. Ambedkar pointedly, in fact, now highlighted the fact that till 1939, whenever Congress party holds its annual, like in the sense sittings, All India Congress Committee meetings, on the same munch, same podium, on the second day, the Goraksha Samiti used to convene. That means Ambedkar says both the Congress and the Hindu Mahasabha were working in hand. They were working hand in glove. And other reason basically is that what we see is that the Pune Pact, where Gandhi went on fast and to death against what Ambedkar achieved in the Pune Pact, actually for the equitable share of power and share of civil rights for the untouchables, and Gandhi went on fast. And the famous Pune Pact was not taking place. That kind of a pact, everybody thinks that it is between Gandhi and Ambedkar. The pact, in fact, the understanding, the compromise, people generally feel that it is between Ambedkar and Gandhi. But the fact is, friends, it was never between Ambedkar and Gandhi. It was between Ambedkar and Hindu Mahasabha, for whom Gandhi was, in fact, acting like a middleman, actually. So that particular hand-in-glove situation, Ambedkar was very clearly exposing. So he was, like in a sense, also like in a sense, he, in the volume 5 of Ambedkar's writing, he talked about, in fact, other religious minorities in this country. He wrote nearly 175 pages on the Christianity in India and the condition of the converts in this country. In the last paragraph of that 175 page, in fact, treatise, Ambedkar says that my warnings and my highlighting of the shortcomings of the Christians, Indian Christians, are the advices of a friend, not of the adversary. And he said, my interest in this community is that a majority of them are from the depressed classes. And I want to warn them. That's what I want to quote. He said, I want to warn these people about the dangers lurking ahead, as the militant Hinduism masquerading in the name of nationalism. And these communities have to reckon with that kind of a situation. And he was writing it in 1938, my dear friends. In 1938, Ambedkar says that there is a lurking danger for these communities, and they have to reckon with a militant Hinduism masquerading in the name of nationalism. That's why we call Ambedkar, in fact, now as a statesman and a visionary. He was looking forward, actually, what's going to happen. So therefore, we also see that kind of a militant religious nationalism working out today. And there is another kind of formulation. Recently, in fact, now there is a kind of a publication. The title of the publication is Rise of Techno-Cultural Hindu Nationalism. The title of the book is that, The Rise of Techno-Cultural Hindu Nationalism. It is a phenomena or the use of internet by the global Indian communities for the promotion of Hindu nationalist ideologies. Technocultural Hindu nationalism, it yokes together the core proposition of Hindu nationalist doctrine. The idea is that India is a Hindu nation and that religious minorities are outsiders to it. With arguments about the imminent rise of Hindu India as a technological superpower, not just in India, at the global level, and the global capitalist colony, in fact, no, in the global capitalist affairs, in the 21st century, India is in fact now assume a very, very important and a critical position. Probably, I think so. That is the aspiration which is now being called as India as a Vishwaguru. But Ambedkar was warning, saying that what they are doing is not to make democracy strong. Ambedkar said, talking about these kind of situations, Ambedkar said, I quote, what they are doing is not to make democracy strong. What they are doing is to liberate the tyrant to practice his tyrannies. And Ambedkar warned, saying that let tyranny has no freedom to enslave the masses of this country. So therefore, friends, without Ambedkar's opposition to that so-called, in fact, no, say like in a sense, what do you call collusive kind of a nationalism, or a collusive kind of a what do you call, in fact, no, colonialism of the internal type. Without that opposition to so-called mainstream Indian nationalism, the process of internal consolidation of the nation would have never been carried out sufficiently enough to strengthen and broaden the social base of Indian nationalism. And Ambedkar strived till his death with all his might at his expense, even going beyond his capacity in exposing, in fact, no, those lurking dangers and fighting for a society, in fact, no, where the social relational brand of nationalism and nation, in fact, now is a social amalgamation, and nation, in fact, now is a power homogenized fraternity, becomes a reality in this country. Unless we take up that kind of a vision and take it ahead, India would never become, in fact, now a democratic nation, and the right kind of a nationalism would not be there, and it doesn't kindle, or in fact, no, it doesn't create that kind of nationalist spirit in this country. I thank you very much for the for the time that you have given, and in fact, no, for having that kind of an opportunity to delve into this very, very crucial dimension of Ambedkar in the formation of the nation, and his, in fact, no, intellectual and theoretical formulations, and also practice and his efforts, in fact, no, towards that end. Thank you very much. I hand over to Professor Ras now, Dr. P.D.Satyapal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Satyapal Garu, for your very powerful, thought-provoking presentation about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's crystal clear and courageous assertions and theorizations of what exactly the nation should be, nationalism, and all about these concepts, and the shallowness of the concept, the present nationalism or nation concept. So what is the mandate for the future generations and the present generations that he has left to take up? So, dear audience, is there any question to pose to the speaker? Regarding the topic Ambedkar on nation and nationalism.
Sir,
Yes, sir. Professor A.K. Sinha garu. Please go
how
ahead.
this study is relevant from anthropological point of view? Hello.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. In fact, no, that's a very, very wonderful kind of a question. We know, like in a sense, Ambedkar was a trained anthropologist, and he has dealt the kind of a topic of nation and nationalism, especially from the anthropological point of view. He did not, in fact, gone to the political scientist formulation of a nation and then nationalism, nor did he, in fact, went into the kind of other side of this thing. His very, like in a sense, premise to enter into this area was social cultural, actually. So that's that's what, in fact, now I've been emphasizing in my talk, quoting Ambedkar, saying that nation as a social amalgamation, nation basically as a power homogenized fraternity, and that is where Ambedkar was talking about. In fact, now the cultural, formulations of this country should strive towards that kind of a social unity. And Ambedkar is critiquing that kind of an ethnocentrism. When I quoted Ambedkar, Ambedkar said the kind of an ethnocentric feelings that the society, which is based on a religious kind of Hindu national Hindu society, is perfected for all generations. In fact, no, Ambedkar called it as the ethnocentric view, which cannot make up a kind of a readiness for the Indian citizens to form up into a democratic society. So all that, in fact, now I've been trying to project or finding out in Ambedkar is that he was trying to premise as a unique kind of a formulation. I have, in fact, now initially like quoting about the many social scientists, also some sociologists and some anthropologists who dwelled into this aspect of nation and nationalism. And Ambedkar stands out, and his formulation, he was unique, that he premises everything in the society and culture, the social formulation in the lineup to the national formation, right kind of national formation. So from that particular perspective, Ambedkar's interventions become very, very crucial and important contributions from the anthropological perspective, as to see how a nation and then a nationalism, rather, in fact, no, a nationality should be couched and theoretically presented and practically, in fact, no, like in a sense, oriented. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Can we think that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's conception of nation and nationalism is a contribution to his school of anthropological thought?
Yes, that was the understanding, because when I was saying that he stands alone in India, rather, in fact, no, in many of the political scientists or even sociologists, anthropologists who picked up this aspect of studies on nationality and then formation. In fact, no, we always see that the aspects of nationality, conception of, in fact, no, nation states, and the studies on nationalism, they fall into the realm of political anthropology. Even in our department, all these arguments, in fact, no, they are couched into the paper called as political anthropology. Say there is always, in fact, no, a tendency to look into, but Ambedkar has very clearly, in fact, no, like devised what is to be a state and what is to be a nation. That is what, in fact, no, I try to project initially. He was saying that what is to be a state, in fact, no, is the political dimension, and what is to be a nation is a social dimension for him. And that is the brilliance of Ambedkar. No one, in fact, no, so far has done that kind of a premise. And I would like to repeat, when that sort of a question has come, he said that social dimension of the nation is expressive of the formation of a fraternity suffused with individual liberty and relational equality. And he says this is the social dimension of nation, and then nationalism, the kind of feeling, the longing to belong. And from the political perspective, the state is the political dimension expressed through the matching juridical, institutional notions of rule of law, rationalized bureaucracy, and uniformized citizenship. This, Ambedkar says, the political, in fact, like dimension of nation and nationhood. So such kind of a articulation, at least to me, like in a sense, it is unheard of even in the political sciences now formulations on India, actually, either by Indian political scientists or anybody from abroad. But when he was premising the social dimension, he is not alone, actually. I have mentioned that he was drawing, in fact, now from Ernest Renan, a French political scientist, where I told, like, the conceptualization, in fact, now came in like that. See, the social conscious, in fact, no, the consciousness of kind. So that particular dimension, in fact, no, Renan called as consciousness of kind or daily plebiscite, which of course called Jews call it as the social communication as an important premise of a nation, and which Ernest Gellner call it as universalization of clerisy, and Benedict Anderson, he called that particular thing in terms of, in fact, no, horizontal camaraderie, actually. And Ambedkar's teacher John Dewey at Columbia University, he called it as social endosmosis. And Ambedkar himself, in fact, no, used the term to express a nation as social amalgamation and social merger. Such kind of an exercise, like in the sense, in premising the social unity, or even, in fact, no, the kind of fraternity, formation of fraternity, moving ahead, the divisive forces of, in fact, no, caste, creed, religion, region, and all, hitherto have not been done by any kind of a either political scientist, a sociologist, a historian, who are working on nationalism and the national movements and all, or even an anthropologist. So in that way, Ambedkar stands unique and alone in charting a very, very important say intellectual contribution, theoretical formulation on nationalism, and also providing a practical lesson implication of it. Yes, I would rather say that, in fact, no, it befits as a kind of a section in Ambedkar's anthropology.
Sir, regarding this regarding the why civilizations fall, or why nations fall, or why how nations flourish. So in that concept, can we think that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, as an applied anthropologist who proposed the strategies for a flourishing nation or a sustainable nation, which will bring hope to all the sections, all the groups of the country?
My personal response is, in fact, no, on the positive, where Ambedkar's expressions almost, in fact, no, like 50 to 70 years ago, they have been, in fact, no, like reverberating very surprisingly in a Nobel Prize winning book. It was in 2018, I think so. That book has been, it won a Nobel Prize. It won a Nobel Prize, and the title of the book is "How Democracies Fail." It was authored by two, like in a sense, an American and a British, actually. And the title of the book is "How Democracies Fail." When I went through that book, it's available, of course. When I went through that book, it was almost, in fact, no, I felt that there have been those ideas have been how democratic nations, rather nation states, when they were, like in a sense, becoming flawed democracies, or when they are, in fact, no, on the verge of like in a sense failure. I find that the authors, in fact, now were reverberating what Ambedkar was anticipating way back some 60s, 6 decades ago. So therefore, yes, his ideas basically, like they are very sincere, very upright, and he did not think, mince anything at all. But his capacity to, like in a sense, grasp the subject and then try to, in fact, couch it within the Indian context is unparalleled. So therefore, yes, in the contemporary times, especially as you're saying, his ideas, in fact, now are very, very say, like in a sense, vital, and they are highly contemporary. Yes.
This word ethnos means a nation. Ethnic groups means if it comes from the Greek word. So our nation is a nation of nations for that sense, because many ethnic groups are there in our country. So because of the plurality and complexity of different levels, and building a nation and bringing a solidarity and a unity and a harmony and social order and sustainable social structure, which is pro-human contribution. So I think that is where much thought is needed, much theorizations are needed, much frameworks are needed for application, to deliver the nation from the social discriminations of various sorts, and social stigmas and the cultural obstacles, and so in that area, the anthropological exploration and anthropological investigations and are really highly needed, because in that way, I think Ambedkar's contribution, I think, path breaking. What do you say, sir?
Yes, I agree, because he was the one, in fact, now who was talking about, in fact, now the ethnic groups, and then he was saying that, like in a sense, with all these kind of diversified groups, thousands of castes, and many of the tribes with different languages, with different kinds of, in fact, now like he was say calling it as caste-based nationalities actually. So that is what he was pondering in the Objective Resolution Constituent Assembly, which met in 1946 October to decide what should be the objective of the Constitution. That is the time, I think so, we know, when everybody, like in a sense, were flamboyant. Jawaharlal Nehru, in fact, now was saying that we would usher in the values of French Revolution in India. We will promise all these people liberty, equality, threatened to each and every person. He was, like in a sense, in his own like in a sense, gusty way, he was talking about to the deep like in a sense, to people living in the Himalayas, and to the citizens of this country living in deep jungles and all. He was talking about those things actually, and because that was a national government, not a Congress government. In fact, no, 1946, immediately after 1947, the government that was being, in fact, now was in the helm of affairs is national government, where all political parties were a part of it actually. It was only 1952, after the general elections, Congress become the ruling party. So everybody participated. Madan Mohan Malaviya and many of the formed talked about the kind of a hope for making a new India. It is at that particular juncture, Ambedkar was wondering. He was saying there is a great difficulty lies ahead us, and he said, I quote, "Our difficulty is not. Our difficulty is how to make this heterogeneous mass that we have today to make them come together." He said this heterogeneous mass of thousands of castes, and then the tribes divided by the religions, divided by the geographies. He was talking about how to make this heterogeneous mass that we have today come together and agree to form a single society. Then he said, our difficulty is not with regard to the ultimate, our difficulty is with regard to the beginning. So for that objective, Ambedkar said, we need to draft a constitution. So therefore, friends, any kind of a, like in a sense, a new India with a new social order and a new moral order, actually, which is compatible to the modern democracy, it is the cherished, in fact, no vision of the people who strive to make this kind of a country. And that is what, in fact, even Ambedkar strived much ahead, in fact, as to how to realize that. So therefore, in any kind of a, like in a sense, formulation, today, after 75 years of independence, today, if you look back in the retrospect, what has happened and what, in fact, like in a sense, is being so envisaged, what we ought to be as a nation and what we are, probably, like in a sense, in that retrospect, Ambedkar, in fact, now becomes a crucial figure in creating that kind of a necessity, the hope, and also, in fact, now paving that kind of a path, and to see that, in fact, now the strife that was necessary to make it. So that's why Ambedkar says our efforts, in fact, now must be equal to the task. So he holds up a mirror to us to show that we have not made such kind of an efforts to make India into true democratic society and also democratic nation. So that is the kind of a lacunae that Ambedkar shows us, in fact, now as a gaping kind of a say kind of a hole between our aspirations and our actions. It's a great inspiration. Yeah.
Sir, from my childhood in the school days, since the university days, on the Independence Day celebrations, I frequently hear the message, we got the freedom and independence from whom they mention, and the freedom fighters they talk about, but freedom for whom and freedom for what? That thing, freedom for freedom from what? Those conceptions are questions are not thoroughly addressed, and I feel a lot of gap and gulf. And freedom from whom? From the Britishers we got the freedom, and we are now independent from them. And independent for what? And freedom for whom? From what? To do what? To have what? All those important questions are really bothering me. And would you please, how these Ambedkar's anthropological school of thought can really address these freedom questions?
I think so, like in a sense, I have dealt with that particular point in, with reference to Ambedkar. When Ambedkar said, all these people, in fact, now including, he was talking about the Congress party and other things and all these people are fighting for social, political freedom. And he said, I repeat, a political freedom gives only freedom to the boundaries of the country. And Ambedkar said, along with the political freedom, I want social freedom. And he said, a political freedom, a just political freedom is a cartographic nationalism, actually. Cartographic freedom. It is only freedom to that particular boundary. And a social freedom means freedom to every citizen within the boundaries of that, what was, makes up a country. So Ambedkar wanted that kind of a holistic kind of freedom. And he was pointing fingers at those who were just fighting, in fact, now only for that kind of a transfer of power that is being, like in a sense, released from the British, actually. And that is what he was accusing them, basically. See, he was saying that without, in fact, say social, kind of a unity or social freedom, even nationalism in India would become a sort of an imperialism. So that is what he was talking about: the external forces, external colonialism, and also the internal colonialism. That's what he was saying actually. See, like in a sense, freedom from the external colonizers, and also freedom from the internal colonizers, the Brahminical. So that is what he was very openly talking about. So therefore, uh, I think these aspects would become very, very crucial. And Ambedkar was like crystal clear on these particular aspects as to what is a freedom, what is the meaning of independence, and how, in fact, no, a formulation of a new nation state as a republic, in fact, no, should cater the right kind of a spirit of freedom, and then the experience of that freedom actually. So he becomes quite an important like in a sense contributed to those aspects. Yeah.
This internal colonizing forces, and what about this personal negative attitudes and all those things? People, if they don't get freedom from their negative attitudes or negative self-image, even though others treat them nicely, and if they don't treat themselves duly, so freedom somewhere it can be lost, and people make the nation, and if people do not have freedom from the others oppressive social sanctions and cultural values that suppress the people and exploit people and justify this the exploitation, and if people don't have freedom from that oppressive cultural processes and also social processes, and if people don't have freedom to overpower the internalized beliefs or values or attitudes, so if where can this freedom go, and how nation can be made or built?
See, unless, as Ambedkar said, unless the social order is changed, all that, in fact, no, that came in the name of political freedom is of no avail. That's what he said. So therefore, when we have these kind of what do you call say imposed hierarchism as a matter of, in fact, no, like in a sense cultural category, Ambedkar, I think so, we talked about this particular thing when we talked about the society in India. He said it is I mean, like the enculturation that becomes, in fact, no, very, very crucial over here. Ambedkar said people are not inherently bad. See, those casteist feelings, those negative feelings, which we consider right now, in fact, no, are incompatible in modern society. Is it that people consciously do? People, in fact, no, rationalize their divisive and what do you call discriminatory feelings. Are they doing it with reason and ration? Ambedkar says no. People behave because they have been socialized into that kind of a behavior. People get encultured, feeling that that is the expected behavior from them. So therefore, Ambedkar wanted to put that kind of a remodeling or reorganization of the society right from, in fact, no, the point of enculturation actually. That is what he says, that reevaluation of values. So he was talking about that kind of the grooming of that kind of a morality. So he wanted that kind of reevaluation of values for a reorganization of the society. That is what actually, like in a sense, kind of a rationality he expected from education. So he says that education, in fact, no, that delivers from all those, in fact, no, like cultural kind of a traditions which are not compatible with the modern, in fact, no, like in a sense, society which is bound by the egalitarian law, where he says that, in fact, no, the cultural legitimacy of the illegitimate, in fact, no, traditions will, when looked up in terms of the modern law, those things, in fact, no, are very difficult. You can't punish. You can't, in fact, no, like in a sense, take up any kind of a what do you call in terms of Ambedkar, surgical measures. The only measure is to make people think actually. As he said, even with kind of a nationality also, he says that nation and nationality, they are psychological feelings. Similarly, like in a sense, if you say caste as a very, very important divisive power or a divisive category, Ambedkar says caste is the notion of mind. They are all, in fact, no, like in a sense, psychological. You cannot find physically caste. So therefore, he wanted those kind of a revaluation of values in order to what do you call, bring in a new order and then restructuring of the society on the democratic way. He premises very importantly based on the kind of education and also the kind of enculturation. So therefore, that is where, like in a sense, we can fit in Ambedkar very, very suitably in the anthropological formulations and all for a new society. Yeah.
Sir, freedom at the level of interpersonal relations and freedom at the level of intrapersonal relation. Is there any applications or framework provided by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar at the individual level, how to experience the freedom, and at the interpersonal relations, what is there any? So already you have mentioned something. Is there any?
That's what I'm saying. See, I think so, like in a sense, mentioned about that particular thing. Even the feeling, the subjective feelings of individuals about freedom, the understandings of nation and nationalism, or in fact, no, like in a way, like in a sense, are different from the longing to belonging to a wider nation, as is in fact no kind of a society, like in a sense, moving as a community. So I mentioned about that particular thing. Probably, like in a sense, I am made to like restate all those what I have covered. See, Ambedkar did talk about, in fact, no, the distinction between community and society, community, society, and nation. So it was a wider kind of a discussion basically, and in the given time, I have a lot to, in fact, bring about to the table, to this thing and all. But yes, I had to be brief, as the brevity allows me not to go into those things, because Ambedkar wrote volumes on these things, not just one. Like when Ambedkar talking about these kind of formulations, and then see, he was like in a sense, right? He already thousands of his pages, his written pages have been printed into 21 volumes. There are still 10,000 more pages to be printed. So his vast and erudite scholarship and then vast writing dwelt with, in fact, in meticulous detail all these aspects of it, and probably, like in a sense, in a a particular course, in a particular topic lecture, in a wider course, like in a sense, we may not cover all these things. I think so. We can talk about freedom in a much more different, in a different kind of a context. See, personal, as you said, in fact, no difference between personal and then, in fact, no, as a group. Yes, Ambedkar did mention, and I reiterated, as a nation, nationality is subjective feelings, and then how, as a nation, one should inculcate those kinds of common feelings and all. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for very useful and illuminative, and really, yeah, a lot of strength is coming, and lot of motivation and direction, and real. Yeah, this is what exactly nation building, how to build a nation and take to the high, better levels of peaceful social coexistence and harmony, and particularly the pluralistic context. Yeah, when knowledge really applied to these kind of situations, and when tough situations and challenges are addressed and provided solutions, that turns into wisdom. That's the wisdom, I think, the Ambedkar's anthropological school of thought is bringing, I believe, and we are really grateful to you, sir, for helping us learn many things about Ambedkar's contribution to anthropology and applied anthropology, particularly for Indian context. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think so. we can retire.
Yeah, dear friends, we are going to close. Is there, before I close, is there any other people to ask question? Okay. Yeah. Thank you all for your patient listening and to the wonderful lecture on Ambedkar and on nation and nationalism, which is very powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Satyapal Garu and dear audience. Looking forward to learn many things from you. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye. See you in the next webinar.